Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. I am sitting here with Squee, my cat, still feeling disgusted. I walked Mabel earlier today, about 5 o'clock, and thanks to daylight savings, around 5 o'clock it is almost pitch black here where I am on the edge of Hollywood and Los Feliz, and my neighborhood. I would say it's an okay neighborhood, although outside, trash everywhere, animal feces everywhere, glass of the broken variety, and also I guess glass bottles, but you know, so. Anyway, Mabel likes to smell things, so we're in this particular patch of the street that's always in shadows, no matter what time of day. No matter, something evil happened there at some point, and it just light does not penetrate this area. So we're there, and Mabel dives into the grass. I think she's just smelling another dog's pee, and then I see her chomp on something, and I go to fish hook it out of her mouth, at which point I'm greeted by fresh feces, and I came home and obviously cut my hand off and then burned it, but no matter how much washing I've done in the last couple hours, I still do not feel settled. So that's where I am. By the way, great episode today for you. This is Chad Clark. If you don't know who Chad is, let me read you his bio right now. Originally from Harlem, musician Chad Clark moved to D.C. as a teenager, where he eventually became part of the D.C. punk scene. He formed his first band, Smart Went Crazy, while still in high school, eventually releasing 2 albums on Dischord, the second of which, Con Art, was named by Pitchfork as one of the best albums of the 1990s. After Smart Went Crazy broke up, Chad formed Beauty Pill in 2001. Since then, they've released a number of EPs and albums, and their latest, just 2015's Beauty Pill, describes things as they are. I should say their latest LP. But that one garnered accolades from everyone from NPR to Rolling Stone to Pitchfork and numerous other publications. Their latest single, Instant Night, was released at the end of October, and I think it might be the best song that's been released this year. Now, there's a little bit of a technical difficulty in this episode. The reason I resisted doing interviews over the internet for so long, I went up until the pandemic kind of refusing to do it. I like the energy that's in the room. There's something special about that energy that I do miss, but also, there's just a lot of technical glitches, and in a studio when you're both there, I can control everything, but recording these ones over Zoom, I have no control over how the satellites send the signals. So the first part of the interview, just us chatting at the beginning, it was not usable, let's say. So I just want to give you a little bit of context. I don't think it really, you're missing anything, but we taped this on November 5th, so 2 days after the election. We still don't know at this point who the winner is. Right now, we're all living anxiety, seeing what the fuck President Dipshit's going to, let's say, get away with. Likely not much, but anyway, we don't have to talk about it. You know what's going on in the news. So when we first started talking, we're living in this real moment of uncertainty before that Saturday when Biden was declared the winner. And we start talking, and Chad is like, I think, I don't know if I could take 4 more years of Trump. I think I need to move abroad. I really don't know what I can do. I'd like to continue doing the band long distance if possible, but I don't know if I can. And I think I also mentioned how much the new song means to me, how much it has really hit me in this moment. If you haven't listened to Instant Night, you should. I guess you could stream it, but it's on Bandcamp. Why not buy it? It's great. It really is. I've been listening to it every day since I first got it back in October, and I've always liked Beauty Pill, but this just got straight to the center of my heart, and I think that's all you miss. So we pick up pretty much right after that. And it was absolutely lovely to talk to Chad. So I hope you enjoy it. By the way, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, welcome to the show. If you want to check out other episodes, they're all there on Spotify. You can download them at beginnings.libsyn.com. Of course, the last 100 should be on all the other podcast apps. I've been doing this show for over 10 years. I've talked to so many artists and musicians and writers and performers. So, just dive in, check out an episode or two. And if you do like what you hear, you can subscribe to the show on Apple, Stitcher, Google, Amazon, the aforementioned Spotify. And of course, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. And I think that's it. Stay tuned, though. I got some amazing interviews coming up. What I've been doing in quarantine is releasing episodes pretty much in the order that I recorded them. Although, if something feels particularly of the moment, then I release that sooner. Just like this episode, it felt like, we were living in that energy between the election and that Saturday that Biden was declared. And it seemed to be something you should hear sooner rather than later. Even though we don't talk about politics, I think the energy makes sense right now. But stay tuned. Great interviews with Ian Mackay coming up, and Tobin Sprout from Guided by Voices, Bobby Previtt, the wonderful composer and drummer who does a lot of stuff with John Zorn, and just tons of other great things. So stay tuned, subscribe to the show. But for now, let's talk to Chad. So wait, we were saying before there were technical difficulties that I was asking, are you do you feel like James Baldwin, like you need to move to another country or to?
Yes, I feel that I feel that I may not have it. I don't feel like I feel like I'm being forced to. It's not. I want to be clear. I've never been one of those I'm moving to Canada kind of first people.
Yeah.
Like those kind of people grate my nerves, honestly. But I just feel that Stephen Miller in particular is a menace. And I think that I think he's bloodthirsty, and I think he is, I think he's got big plans. I think Trump is just a sort of garden variety narcissist con man who just likes attention and wants to be loved and wants to be sort of feared.
Yeah.
But I think Stephen Miller actually has an agenda. That's what I believe. I know that you said you don't want to talk about the election, and I understand that, that's what I'm. He's the person I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
It's the Steve Bannons, it's the Steve Millers, it's those people, the cunning snakes, who terrify me more than Trump himself.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, so I love my band. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done. And I would very much like to continue. I'm not in any way suggesting that I'm tired of the band or that there's acrimony in the band. The band is getting along really well. I feel like we all understand what we're doing. And we have a good relationship with our label. And things are artistically, I feel like going very well. I feel like I'm increasingly I feel understood.
Mm-hmm.
Instant Night is a song without drums. And initially I was a little uneasy about that. But it's just it's just sort of the way the song kind of wanted to be.
Yeah.
But and I just feel that people are more and more open to what we're doing, and more open to us pushing into different terrains. And artistically, I feel encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, and I don't know. Maybe our band could exist somehow long distance. I think Erin and her husband even talked about moving themselves. So maybe I don't know. Maybe we'd end up in the same. I have no idea. It's all a big question mark right now.
Yeah.
It all hangs in the balance.
I mean, you're in DC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you from there? Because I talked to Ian MacKaye on the show a couple weeks ago, and I was really curious about, like, are you attuned? Like, to me, like, DC feels like there's a lot of dark energy there, like a lot of like Moloch type stuff. And I was wondering if you felt it, or if I just made that up in my head. And also, on top of that, are you from DC originally?
I grew up in between Harlem and Washington Heights.
Oh.
In New York City. Up until the age of 13, I was in New York City.
Oh.
So I did not grow up here. No.
Oh, that's where my wife's from. My wife's from Harlem. She grew up in Lenox Terrace, and then on like and 135th.
Yeah, that's my home, and I feel like I have a kind of a dual. I don't know if this is really the case anymore. If I'm just deluding myself, but I feel like I have a kind of dual quote citizenship unquote with between New York and DC. I went to school in New York. I went to NYU.
Mm-hmm.
So I have kind of been back and forth, but mainly I've been here, and I consider the music that I make to radiate from here. Maybe not as intensely as Ian's sort of vantage,
Mm-hmm.
Having been like a native all of his life. But I feel very much a part of this area. And I think of my band as that being an important component of our work.
I mean, having lived in both New York and DC, do you see like, what is the different characters to those cities, or at least like what is the different character to like DC and Harlem?
Well, I was a kid a long time ago, and we're talking more than 30 years ago. So I can't really speak to modern New York at all.
Right. Right. You grew up in the Harlem of the like 80s.
Yeah. Yeah. I like, and I have very positive memories of it. I was, as a kid, I was dismayed to move. I didn't want to move, but my parents were moving, and that's the way it goes. I'm really happy that I started a band in DC and not in New York. I think DC is a more, at least when I was starting to make music, was a more inviting terrain to start from. There's not this sort of industry mindset, competitive, trying to make it kind of vibe here as it was in New York. And that was healthy for me. That was positive for me. I don't know that I have much insight into into the New York of today. I liked going there. There's a studio that I use, which is called Studio G in Brooklyn, that I like a lot. But I don't feel like I don't feel like I can comment meaningfully on the contrast between DC and New York.
Oh, I'm not looking for, I guess, let me be a little more bald with the question. I am curious about like how these two cities formed you. Cause Harlem in the 80s, my wife likes to say that, she could get a seat on the train at 95th Street because that's when all the white people would get off. And so Harlem in the 80s was a very different place than it is now in this very kind of like gentrified. When we walk around, it's like very gentrified. It's very like upper middle class white people with babies and carriages walking around. I'm kind of curious, like what the Harlem of your youth, for the first 13 years you grew up there, what was that like? How did that form you? And then how did DC kind of change your personality, or how did it build upon that, I suppose?
Okay. So I feel, in a lot of ways, like my memory of, 162nd Street, as I said, is equidistant between Harlem and Washington Heights. Yeah. I'm not even sure that it has a specific neighborhood, like that my street necessarily had a specific neighborhood name attached to it. It was, I think we could have easily claimed Washington Heights or Harlem. We were certainly right on the border, I think. My memory, I grew up, you have to understand, okay, so my parents are kind of amazing people. My dad was, both my parents are lawyers and intellectuals and professors and activists. And my dad actually was Martin Luther King's lawyer for a while. Really? And he was the attorney general of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. My mother ended up being Bill Cosby's lawyer, believe it or not. She has no insight into any of the scandals around Bill Cosby. But I grew up around Black intellectuals. We didn't have a lot of money, but we were better off than most of the people in our neighborhood. I think I grew up with, I would come home and my parents were reading, and my dad smoked a pipe. And so I have this sense memory of coming home. And I just grew up with people who, I had a almost entirely Black existence. But I have to say that my parents, in a certain way, were kind of an elite. And my friends were not. My friends on the street were not. And I wasn't as aware of the class differences between us as maybe I should have been. But I certainly had an interesting journey with regards to class and race. You talked to Ian MacKaye. I would have to say that Ian MacKaye is a very important figure in my life. And I'm talking later when I moved to DC, mm-hmm. Both as an icon and later as a friend. And Ian is, in a lot of ways, Ian is very comfortable with Black people, and he's like not racist. There's nothing, like, that dude is so straight up, and I love him. I think that the DC punk scene's kind of general like anti-racism as a general culture is partially what made me drift. I felt I didn't feel excluded. I didn't feel pushed away, at least initially. Later on, this is in DC. But yeah. So anyway, going back to New York, I in a lot of ways, like I feel like early Sesame Street kind of reminds me of growing up in Harlem, like the brownstones. I lived in a brownstone. Like the vibe of Sesame Street reminds me of my upbringing. And you won't hear a lot of people who grow up in Harlem say anything like that. Oh, my neighborhood reminded me of Sesame Street, but it honestly did. And that my memories of growing up in Harlem are very positive, and I love playing stickball. I have very, very fond memories of New York at that time. Now, look, I also saw a dude killed on the corner of my street.
Oh.
So, I mean, it's not like I was unaware of urban reality. But I have a generally warm feeling towards my childhood in New York.
Yeah. I mean, when you were talking about, like, look, when I was a kid, I'm sorry, I realized I cut myself off because I'm like, let me start at a different place. When I was a kid, I didn't understand class differences. I felt it bodily. I could understand I grew up middle class, and I could understand when I was in the presence of someone wealthy because I felt less than, and I didn't understand why I felt that. I just felt it. And I'm kind of curious about your own, like when you were a kid, you said you didn't like understand these class differences. I think it's difficult unless, you are, and especially in America where class is completely papered over or ignored or repressed. I think it's difficult to understand these things, especially as a kid. And I'm kind of curious about if you could go into a little more detail about what you meant by like not understanding it or it being like there being differences.
I mean, I'm gonna like I did not grow up wealthy, but there was a big difference culturally in my house in that reading and knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge, was very highly valued. Education was very highly valued, and there are kids that just weren't getting that at home. That's just the fucking reality. There are kids that just weren't getting the same kind of upbringing. I mean, I bring up my dad's pipe smoke because it's a sense memory that links me to remembering how much I saw my dad sitting in silence and reading a book, and that had a large impact on me. And I think you can feel it in Beauty Pill's music to this day. I think you can feel my dad's pipe smoke. My dad died last year.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. And I think you can feel that in Beauty Pill's music. I feel like there's curiosity and articulation in our music that I feel like is unusual, and I think it radiates from my upbringing. And that speaks directly to the theme of your show, which is the origins of creativity. And for me, that was very key. But class is very tricky. Class is affluence for sure, but it's also mindset.
Yeah.
And my parents had my mom worked for a brief time with James Baldwin.
Wow.
Towards the end of his life, I met James Baldwin. I actually had dinner with James Baldwin when I was a kid.
Wow.
I'm too young. I was too young to really recall it. I actually made an ass of myself in front of James Baldwin. I did an impression of Eddie Murphy for James Baldwin at dinner. It's one of my most embarrassing and painful memories. My parents were horrified. They were looking at me like, "Do you know who this is?" But yeah, I was exposed to the parties that we had in my house were, if we didn't have Cornel West over at my house, I'd have to ask my mom if Cornel West ever came over to our house. But Cornel West types were in my house all the time. If you follow me,
Mm-hmm.
like people like that. Black intellectuals, Black revolutionaries, artists. And I have to say that, now looking back, those people in a certain way were an elite. I was not aware of it at the time. But so I grew up with Black intellectuals, and that's a founding kind of environment for me.
Yeah, and then because I think this is really interesting because especially in America, especially the media class, the way it kind of understands, let's just say it understands Blackness as monolithic, the media class, when in reality, when you dig down deep, it's not. And I think there is something very interesting about that you growing up on kind of this intersection of both like seeing growing up, I guess, working class, or like, what would you say, middle class, and
I would say, my parents did all right. I would not call us working class. I would say we were middle class people, for sure.
Okay. So growing up on that intersection though, between, the kind of like intellectual elite and also like middle class, which in New York is not bad, but it's also like you witness, it's a city. I don't know about in the 80s, but definitely like when I lived there, it was, I lived there post Giuliani, and
right.
It was just like a city that started to cater to the very wealthiest.
Yes. Yeah, I was pre-Giuliani. And I hear you. The Harlem of today is something I probably wouldn't recognize. I've seen it. I've seen it described, and I've seen it on video. I actually haven't visited Harlem myself physically since I was, well, actually not since I was a kid, since college probably, 20 years ago. But yes, class is class and money are factors for all of us. I don't know how to characterize it in terms of its effect on my work. I do think that I'm pretty confident.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, I think I'm a generally pretty confident artist, and I'm not afraid to try things. And I think that I was given, this is to my parents' credit, honestly. I was given a feeling like you can create your own path. and I feel like Beauty Pill's music reflects that to this day.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like, when I was saying like, oh, how do these two cities form you in some way? I do think there's something interesting about DC and the punk scene there being very, I mean, tell me if this is accurate. You said anti-racist, but I'll say also welcoming. Whereas at least again, I'm seeing the New York music scene, 2 decades after you live there, but like it's extremely white. It's it's very, probably not welcoming. I mean, it's difficult for there to be any non-white spaces in indie rock in New York, I think.
I mean, I'll take your word for it. I don't know.
Yeah, just from other people I've had on the show or like friends that I've talked to, it doesn't seem as welcoming as like the DC punk scene. And so,
well, I have to say, there were people like Ian and all the members of Fugazi, just extraordinary dudes, just lovely people.
Yeah,
their music reflects the cumulative intelligence and empathy, I think, of all of them. I have a very high opinion of that band and its members. But I'm not going to name names, but there were definitely some white guys who were hostile, and who felt territorial, and who I remember being told, and this is a vivid memory. I remember being told by more than one person that because I don't resemble HR from Bad Brains,
right?
Which I don't. There's nothing about me that reminds you of HR, right? You
Right.
would agree with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was told that they don't even know how to, like, what kind of creature I am, because all they know is HR and people who look like and act like and sound like HR. I love HR, but fuck that.
Right.
Fuck that. So that, I did experience some, it tends to come from insecure. I mean, insecurity is the cause of, I think, a lot of the, if not all of the violence in this world. The dudes who are most territorial were the worst musicians, the most hacked musicians. I mean, seriously, I'm not going to name names, but I could name names right now, and you would just go, oh yeah, that guy. Or you wouldn't, because he's fucking forgotten. But I have to say that there's a reason why black artists cultivate this sort of. I mean, Kanye is obviously a disturbed, troubled dude who has
right.
brain chemistry issues. We all recognize that.
Right.
But his bravado, his sense of like, you guys are lucky to have me, that shit comes from adversity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have a little bit of that. I have a little bit of that. I hope it never veers into a kind of insufferable arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm confident. I'm centered within what I'm doing, and a lot of that has to do with having to feel fucking hacks who compared me to HR or whatever.
Yeah.
In a way, it makes you stronger, and it makes you, and it's this sort of diffidence that is pretty in vogue, or has been in indie rock, I think comes from a different culture than I come from, and that's probably a key difference with me. I'm not going to feign humility for the purpose of being liked, or for the purpose, like, I believe in believing in myself.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a race informed trait on my part.
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, it's, again, I won't name names, but I just see this from my wife's a stand-up, and she's easily one of the best stand-ups of her generation. And, you know, you sit there and you watch hacks get opportunities, white hacks specifically get opportunities. And it's only a function of race and of kind of the white supremacist structures that have just structured all of our existences in this country. But, you know, I think on the other end of that, it does, not that this is a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing in one sense, but, like, you know, it comes at a cost, but it builds that kind of confidence in you.
Yeah. I mean, or it takes you down.
Yeah.
And I've chosen not to let it take you down, and, you know, more power to your wife. Don't let it take you down.
Yeah.
Don't let it take you down. It's easier said than done, though, because there's moments of true despair. You know, there are moments where you really, you're not sure how to go on. I'm like, in the same sense that I'm not going to pretend that I don't have some self-belief. I'm not going to pretend that I'm not vulnerable.
Right.
I'm a sensitive and vulnerable person. I can be hurt. Definitely, I can be hurt. I'm not impervious. You know, you can hurt me. But I feel more than ever, you know, I'm also getting older, and that's another factor too. And I'm moving into a different kind of aesthetic terrain in a way. And I don't know that what I'm doing is going to read as rock music from this. I don't know what the future holds necessarily. I have a bunch of demos for the next Beauty Pill album that we're ready to record. We'd actually hoped to record them this past summer, but obviously COVID prevented that.
Right.
But I'm what I'm doing is shifting in tone, and I don't, you know, where the audience is for that, I don't know. I mean, as I said, I'm very encouraged by the response to Instant Night. But my future is a question mark. My future is a question mark on a number of levels.
Yeah. I mean, let me throw this at you and see if this makes sense. I think whiteness in America, it's surrounded by unearned confidence, whereas maybe your confidence is whereas I see at least you and Naomi. Obviously, this is not everyone, but I'm saying, like, you have a hard-won confidence that's built on real accomplishments and, like, making good art, as opposed to it just being a function of race. Does that make sense?
I appreciate you saying that. I think that probably everybody believes that their confidence is earned. That's the way. That's how unearned. You know what I mean? Like, the last label, Beauty Pill, in 2015, put out a record called Beautiful Describes Things as They Are. And it is probably, I'm going to say it is certainly the strongest thing that I've ever created in my life.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
And it was very well received. But we were working with a small indie label that was funded with. It was the first time I left. I knew I couldn't continue to release music on Discord for economic reasons, for simple budget reasons, as well as cultural reasons. There was a constant misunderstanding of what Beautiful was doing, and there was a sort of a ghettoizing of our music into this sort of punk rock framing that was hurting the music basically. And I left Discord. I love Discord, and I loved and continue to love Discord, but I knew we had to go.
Right.
And the very first thing that happened, we were hit on. I'm not going to name a label, but we were hit on by a famous British label that was interested in the record, and we were also hit on by this guy who ran this tiny esoteric art kind of I don't even know how you describe it. Is basically an affluent kind of art supporter kind of guy, running this very tiny label out of upstate New York.
A patron.
A patron, yes, thank you. And he said very, very, very complimentary things to me. He called me a genius. He called the record an American masterpiece. These are actual quotes. And it was very, his courting was very aggressive, whereas the legendary British label, their vibe was more kind of like, oh, we're interested, but there's like 10 other things we're interested in, and we'll get back to you. So their interest seemed very faint, and so I went with the patron guy, and that's who released that record. Unfortunately, it turned out that he is totally insane. And it's really a bummer, because my band were all, at the time, in the decision-making point, my band had been like, we should go with this famous British label, and not this unknown guy in upstate New York who happens to have some money. And I said, no, we're going with that guy. And that was a mistake. But the most interesting thing to me about him, his name is Alan Formello. He's like the worst person in my life that I've ever met.
Oh man.
I dislike him so strongly. I'm hesitant to use the word hate, but it's close to that.
I'm so sorry.
And yeah, it's a bummer. And so we were putting out this record that everyone seems to love, and we thought was an artistic breakthrough. And in many respects, it was the best year. 2015 was amazing. We were told that we were being considered for 2 Grammys.
Wow!
Like this little, this RDDC, weird esoteric band. We're being considered for Grammys. Like we couldn't believe it. But working with Alan was absolutely torture. He didn't know what he was doing, and he was full of the thing that you just said, that awful combination of words, unearned confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Alan had tons of unearned confidence. And it was my first insight into, wow, it doesn't seem to bother you that you haven't actually done anything. You believe in yourself without any achievements. and I just remember thinking, where did you get this attitude from? Like, what? and it's like the world gave him that attitude.
Yeah.
He grew up as an affluent white kid, and he was told the sun rises and sets on him, and he just had no other concept. That was his operating concept. I'm amazing. I'm brilliant. I deserve what I have. And you should listen to me because I know what I'm doing, because I say that I do. And I had never really encountered that before. And it was disgusting to see up close. The end of the story is that I now own Describes Things as They Are again.
Oh.
I have the rights back.
Oh, that's great.
So it's a positive end of the story. Like, and I now, honestly, I make a living from that record. So, it all worked out in the end. But it was certainly an interesting journey for me, interfacing with this guy who absolutely believed in himself without any in a sort of unfounded way, which sounds so mean to say. It sounds so mean to say that.
No, it's not. It's true. I mean, look, we've been out. We've been out here in Los Angeles for a couple years now, and this town is built on that. And the thing is, these people are the gatekeepers for everything, right? The wealthiest white people happen to control what culture is made, what music is made, television, everything. And so everything has to be you either have to con them, or you have to filter your whatever you're making, your art, through them so that they allow it to happen. And it's one of the or maybe not maybe just get them, manipulate them in some way, get them to be your ally. That's also a possibility. That's how some stuff is made. But those are the three basic tactics.
Yeah, I sometimes I'm starting to do more scoring work, and people tell me all the time that I should move to LA. And when I think about it, it's not unappealing. Nice weather and walking around the corner and seeing someone else who happens to be in the same industry or in the same field. That is appealing to me. I don't have that here. But I get scared about all the other things that you just said. I don't know that I could do it.
But wait, can I ask, why did your parents move when you were 13 to DC?
My dad became the general counsel of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And had a job in DC, and so we moved.
What year was that?
I guess that was 84.
Okay, so this is Reagan era.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that situates it a little more for me, because I was kind of curious about this is also I guess punk, the DC hardcore scene is really kind of in full bloom at that point, right? Or maybe it's on its decline, and then you're a teenager kind of growing up in that.
Well, I have to say that I was not that aware of it when I was there at first. I was a little too young to get it.
Mm-hmm.
My first, it was I had friends. It was literally maybe 2 or 3 years later in high school, having friends who were into Dag Nasty,
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of thing. The most pop end of DC hardcore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not putting Dag Nasty down, but they were essentially a pop band that happened to have sort of chugging Marshall guitars.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty far cry from the real, from Faith Void and stuff like that.
Yeah, the Husker Du end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I would say so. So yeah, hardcore didn't. I I really the DC stuff that I fell in love with was later. The DC rock stuff that I fell in love with was later. I loved Fugazi. I didn't care that much about Minor Threat, to be honest with you. I am actually the person who mastered Minor Threat. But it was Minor Threat was not a big deal to me personally. Fugazi was the thing that I really loved.
Yeah.
And I also really loved Rites of Spring, and I loved a lot of the later stuff from that period. You know, Lungfish and Shudder to Think, and the kind of the freakier, more psychedelic, more experimental side of the Discord world. I think had more of an effect on me than the earlier stuff did.
Mm-hmm.
The earlier stuff, I don't know, I didn't speak to me as much. There was a stiffness to and a valuing of stiffness that punk music, earlier punk music had, that I just couldn't really relate to. There was a fluidity that came in, and a little bit of a blackness that came in with Fugazi, that spoke to me and seemed like it was informed by hip hop and all these things that I loved growing up, and that was the connection for me. You know, the this sort of hardcore beat kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hesitant to say this because it's kind of a fucked up thing to say, but it's kind of a white beat.
It is. No, it is.
And I just didn't. That was not the thing for me. But you know, I actually, you know, I came to understand the power of Minor Threat, both culturally and musically, later. But that had not been the thing that had entranced me. Fugazi really just messed my head up.
Mm-hmm.
I just fucking love that band, and I still do. And I contend that there's only like 2 or 3 bad songs out of hundreds. So, yeah.
I mean, how did your life change when you moved to DC? I mean, are your parents still kind of like, is your house still a kind of like intellectual salon, or is it just more like government functionaries?
You know, here in DC, my mother and father's peers were Eleanor and Ed Norton. Who Eleanor is in Congress now, representing DC. No, we lived in the suburbs here,
mm-hmm.
And that was a huge shift. And you know, the first time I ever was called a nigger was on a soccer field, and it was a Vietnamese kid. We lived in a Vietnamese suburb, or not Vietnamese suburb, a suburb with a large Vietnamese community,
mm-hmm.
Arlington, Virginia, and it was the first time I ever was directly called a nigger. It had the Doppler effect on it. Actually, this kid was running past me on the soccer field, and I didn't even understand what he said, honestly. I was like, did he just and he also had a Vietnamese accent, so it was a pretty surreal moment that I, for some reason, recall very strongly. Like I can remember the wind, the breeze blowing, and the sort of like my focus on the game, and then for the first time being called a nigger by another minority who seemed to have the idea that he was entitled to do that. I don't know I think about back to that, and I just like, I wonder what the mentality was. So no, my life was very different. My life, the texture of my life was very different. I liked the suburbs in a lot of ways. It was, you know, more, you walk down the street and everything is paved and everything is nice and things are, the bushes are trimmed, and I don't, it was a different physical existence. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm just curious about like, cause to me, like moving, from, moving at 13 to a very different place, it's such a rupture. And I was just kind of curious. I mean, there's no real answer I'm looking for. I'm just kind of curious about like, how do you think that like, shifted your personality, or not shifted, maybe like, just like, how did that, create you as a person? Did things change through that move?
Yes, things, also became a teenager, and that's when music started to kind of like not leave me alone.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I kind of feel like, music, this is such a corny thing to say, but I feel like music chose me. I mean, it's such a corny thing to say. I hate saying it, but it's really true. Like, I really felt like, music was like a hawk that like picked me up in its talons and like lifted me off the ground. I mean, as corny and as Maya Angelou as that sounds, that's really what happened.
Yeah.
And I happened to be in a place where I had access to a pretty inspiring, local music scene, and that affected what I thought was possible. And here I am. So yes, the shift in moving, suddenly I'm surrounded by white people,
Mm.
and you listen to my speech. I'm someone who can talk on the phone, and people mistake me for white.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened. I grew up with black intellectuals. I learned how to speak from black intellectuals. I did not learn how to speak from white people. But because of the way I speak, there are people make all sorts of assumptions about the kind of person that I am, and they get it wrong.
Right.
But I think that shift, that alienation. I remember I was a kid. I was a super nerdy kid. I carried around, and this is another thing that's going to sound made up, but it's really true. I used to carry around like the worst dork ever. I used to carry around the complete works of Shakespeare. As a single book. It was about 900 pages long. It was old and musty, and for some reason, I thought it was badass to carry it around school invisibly so people could see that I was holding the complete works of Shakespeare. I don't know why I thought that was cool, because there's literally nothing less cool. But that's, that was my, I don't know. I very much, now that I'm older, I feel like being a black nerd is part of my strength.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was younger, I was sort of more finding myself, I guess.
Yeah.
But I respond. I mean, I have to say, the thing that I wish people focused on when they talk about the DC punk scene is the intellectual aspect. Like, Guy Picciotto is an absolutely fascinating intellect. you can hear it and you can see it in his words, in his songs. But anytime you talk to him, like the people in the DC punk scene were pretty brainy people. Ian is a pretty brainy guy.
Yeah.
And there was a valuing of intellect or intellectualism or whatever you want to call it in that scene that made me feel welcomed. I didn't feel like it was something that was like no one. I felt included in that respect too. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case for other punk scenes, where there was more of a kind of a focus on being just rebellious in a sort of more general way, or I don't know. I feel like there was an intellectualism in the DC music scene that was inspiring to me and made me want to start a band in that world.
Is that so?
So I feel 100% certain I would not be making music if it weren't for DC. I feel certain of that.
So it's really like, because I think there is something interesting about the fact that you found some kind of resonance, right? You're coming from a very like intellectual context, and then going into another one, and you find resonance there in the same way that it was there in your household in New York.
I agree. Ian, in a lot of ways, reminds me of my dad. My dad and Ian never met. My dad, as I said, died in November of 2019. My dad and Ian never met, unfortunately. But in a lot of ways, Ian's whole approach to life and approach to the world reminded me of my dad. And I probably have a little bit of a father, like a hang up with Ian because of that. And that's not Ian's fault. But yes, you're right. I would say that there's a lot of parallels between the radical expression and progress of the DC music scene and the civil rights movement. I think there are a lot of parallels there.
I mean, what were your parents like? I was about to say, what were your parents like when you were growing up? But maybe, did your parents also change through this move? So I guess what were they like in New York? And then did they change a little bit through the move, or were they pretty steady as people?
My parents got divorced. And they ended up not liking each other at all. Sadly. I would say I don't know that there's something in the move that changed them necessarily. I think they were happy to. Look, here's the reality. Here's the reality for me and my brother. I have a brother who's a couple years younger than I am, and my brother is very, very smart. And he's now a lawyer, a patent lawyer. My brother went to MIT undergrad and Stanford Law, and graduated at the top of his class. My brother is a very, very smart guy. My parents, I think, believed that if we stayed in our neighborhood, that we would become just brilliant drug dealers. And that was what was on offer for us in our neighborhood, as smart kids. It's just really get good at hustling.
Mm-hmm.
And and so they wanted us to not grow up in that environment once we hit adolescence. And so I think that was part of the calculus that went into their move. I unfortunately, they grew apart for, I think, unrelated reasons, personal reasons, later on when we were in DC. Yeah, I mean, this move is definitely, it is a big part of my story for sure. I actually haven't really thought about it a lot until this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I only ask, it's just like, it's the thing that stands out to me, because I think about when I talk to people. Look, this is my basic theory on like how we develop is I see us as kind of like a bunch of different vectors pushing on us in different directions, and however strong those vectors are, right? You also have however your brain just is, right? You come out a certain way, and your brain and obviously your brain develops for the first 20 years, but still there's some kind of like basic form it's in, right? And then the vectors kind of push you different ways. And then when I see like different like things like big ruptures, like moving to a completely different state, a different environment, right? Or like things like divorce, which is like a big rupture in your family and things like that. I try to think about like how those things actually affect you or push you in certain directions, especially to make music. Both like to make music as a job, I think is risky. And I try to, how did you get into that? How did that happen? And also I think making, what I call interesting art, which is I think what you make, I think is
thank you.
There is obviously everything on the show is very anecdotal, so it's not like I have hard data, but I'm curious how those ruptures like push people in different directions. And I wonder if you've, now that we're talking about it, if you have any thoughts.
It just goes back to the theme. I feel like I've been, being an outsider of the DC punk scene. I actually hadn't, going back, I actually hadn't intended to be on Discord at all.
Mm-hmm.
I liked this other label, which is called Adult Swim. Are you aware of that label?
No.
It was, before the Adult Swim channel.
Right.
Adult Swim put out bizarre records by this band, a DC band called 9353,
mm-hmm.
who were just totally bizarre and almost like something maybe even closer to like The Residents or something like that.
Uh-huh.
This very bizarre kind of avant-garde kind of theater it's hard to explain. And they also put out records by Girls Against Boys. And they had put a lot of attention into those records. The graphics, I really loved the graphics of those records. The layouts of those records were very lush and detailed, and I thought that was really cool. And I had actually wanted to be on that label, not Discord. I never felt like I belonged on Discord. But when I contacted the guy who owned that label, who's Jeff Nelson, who was one half of Discord,
mm-hmm.
He told me, well, actually, Adult Swim is kind of out of money. But would you like to be on Discord? And I remember thinking, I don't know if what I do makes any sense on a label that's sort of famous for hardcore punk. Like I hadn't really seen myself that way. But just like I want to pitch it to Ian and see what he has to say. And I was like, okay, I'm a kid. I don't really feel like I have a huge array of choices. And and here he is offering for me to be on the most legendary label in the city, you know. So I'm not stupid. I'm not, but there's another situation where I was sort of intent on another thing, and I was a little bit disappointed with the outcome initially. And I ended up on Discord, as we all know at this point. I think that it's really been, and I never really felt like I belonged there necessarily. Like my music was more, my old band Smart and Crazy, our music was, there was not exactly any other bands on the label that were like ours. We had a cellist, and we had these sort of ornate melodies, and everything we did sort of sounded like I Am the Walrus. We didn't exactly feel like we belonged, but I feel like not belonging in a lot of these different situations in my life has strengthened me over time, to the point where I'm not freaked out about not belonging. Like my band as it exists right now, how would you, if you were trying to get someone to listen to, let's take Infant Night, which is just the most recent thing.
Yeah.
How would you even describe it as a genre? Like, how would you describe it to someone who you're trying to get to listen to it? You're trying to get into it. This is a challenge. This is the marketing challenge for our label at this point, because we're sort of in our own genre, sort of. But I'm not freaked out by that. I understand the perils of it commercially, but it doesn't freak me out. And I think having spent a lifetime of not really feeling part of or feeling on the margins of this scene or that scene, either musically or culturally, is why I feel strong about what I'm doing. So that's my summation of the journey. But it's been a long time since I've really contemplated the specific details of my childhood journey. This has been cool for me because I haven't really thought about it in a while.
Yeah. I mean, I love talking to you. Can I ask one more question before we go?
Sure.
I'm really curious, when you said it felt like music chose you, to me that sounds like it was a calling, right? Like there was some kind of you felt it from inside that you didn't have a choice.
Yes.
And I'm kind of curious about, how you became to recognize that feeling. I mean, for me, look, until I started therapy, I say this on the show a lot, but until I started therapy, I was pretty unaware. The emotions were happening in me. I was very unaware of stuff. It took me a long time to realize things. And then through therapy, I started to actually pay attention to my body a lot more and be like, oh, that's a feeling. Oh, okay. Oh, that's what happiness is. All right. I get it now. And,
right.
and I'm kind of curious about, how you recognize this calling. Was it was it loud? Was it did it take you a long time to hear that feeling in you?
It just became, I've started to interpret the world. I really appreciate you asking this question so incisively, because I just realized that, I'm literally having this realization right now in real time right now. But I just started to process everything through songs I was writing. It just helped me organize. It helped me organize my fucking experience. It helped me organize it. It helped me make sense. I started making verses and choruses, and I started to see the world. Okay, the Beauty Pill album describes things as they are, everyone sort of took that as a sort of a jokey title. I don't know how people. For me, part of it was trying to say, I know that Beauty Pill's lyrics are sometimes surreal or abstract, but I truly believe that what I'm trying to do, what we're trying to do, is to really, is almost like factual reporting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is how I'm experiencing. Like, this sort of poetic expression is essentially reportage, and so I have to say, like, the music just started to help me. I started to be able to, I could go to school and I could see things through songs. I could see things through I know that sounds bizarre, but I'm only realizing, like, that's probably the best way to describe it. Like, I started to see through music. Like, I started to experience things as a beat and as a melody, and it helped me make more sense of life. And I feel like, I mean, I feel that it's what I think that what I'm doing, I don't know that what I'm doing is amazing. I want it to be amazing, but I do know that it's authentic, and I do know that it's not contrived, and I do know that it comes from a real place.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, for me, it's like a life journey. And that's what I'm doing. I'm organizing experience and vision and dreams and memories and hopes and wishes through songs. That's what I'm doing.
I love it, Chad. I can't thank you enough. This was a real joy to talk to you.
Hey, man, thank you for being interested and thanks for asking these really interesting questions. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I have a tendency to ramble, which is not beloved to everybody.
No, not at all. Loved it. Loved every minute of it. I'm not blowing smoke up your butt.
Thank you. All right, let's go check on the election.
Oh boy, yes. Okay, back to reality.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh bye, oh bye, oh bye.